they always just give him shit.
I gotta listen to it. Van Lathan's super talented. I'm a big fan of him.
I just think it's interesting to. You just don't like. Whenever I think of a stereotypical like nerd culture, I'll think of like a white dude who's like a software engineer who like. I mean, we all have our like generalizations, right?
Stereotype.
And so I like, like Van Lathan is like a black dude, but not just like a black dude that you wouldn't think is necessarily all those nerd prototypes, right? He plays sports and basketball. He talks about sports. He loves sports. Like he loves rap. He talks about everything.
Yeah.
I mean, it's similar actually in a lot of ways to you. Yeah. But then like he has this whole podcast that's completely revolves around Marvel and he has higher learning. He has a bunch.
Yeah.
But like
he has a bunch where he like, and I think that's the bigger thing. I think people are realizing now more than ever that like that whole stereotype thing was kind of always wrong.
Yeah, people are always more than one thing.
Yeah. And also, too, that, like, cool things are cool things. Like, I saw this video of one of my favorite TikToks. It's, like, this black dude, and it's just him, it's like a 3-second shot of him just, like, looking at his phone, and then all of a sudden it cuts, like, this video of this black dude who's, like, another black dude who's, like, some of you wanted to see the lightsaber sequence from blah, 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 like names this random Star Wars something, and he goes, here it is. And he does it. And it's, like, actually, like, really good. But it's, like, so good that you're like, the amount of time you have had to put into your
to choreograph
fake
this
lightsaber sequence, whatever. And it cuts back to black dude, and he's just staring at the camera, and he goes, I got to get into cooler shit. Like just like and he's like that was hella cool, man. That was hella cool. And he's like I've never done anything like that. I need to do cooler stuff. And I just remember that was like such a great way to shout out this guy that's doing something that you're like, yeah, well maybe it's not your thing, so you could like judge it and be like, oh, it's fucking weird. But at the same time, you're like, it's actually fucking cool that like this dude who's in a higher position, maybe socially, is just like pointing out that like. It's cool when people do something they're passionate about.
Yes.
And we can't be on that high school bullshit anymore of like, oh, because it's not the mainstream, because it's not like celebrity, or we associate so many bullshit things with it that like, oh, these video game dudes, like they don't get laid, they don't have drive. Yeah. They don't have other skills. They're not socially, adept.
And I can't hoop.
Yeah, and I'm like, dude, these guys, like, if you're curious at all, esports is worth more collectively than every major sports league combined. A lot of these dudes who really rip at it, who design these games, they're millionaires. These guys who like build this culture, they're winning. And I think that's the part is like if we know it's that valuable, it's more valuable than every sports league combined. You have to go like clearly a lot of people are a part of this. And just because there's like that weird part of culture that's like, it's not really my thing, like whatever. And I think Van Lathan knows that. I think he gets that like there's a huge chunk of the population. I mean, also too, what's also funny is like I would say this: there's games that were like socially acceptable when you were younger, like video games you could fuck with, like, oh yeah, I play Madden,
Street Fighter,
Street Fighter,
Tekken,
NBA Street, blah blah. But there were games that if you like mentioned that you played, like people were like, "You fucked up, dog. Like you're weird." Right? Like, you don't fit. So if you're like, what games do you play? And you're like, I mean, I play those games too. You're like, but honestly, like, I love playing WoW. People were like, wow. Like, how could you play World of Warcraft? Like, because it was so fucking dorky. And I was like, you ever played it? Because it's a blast.
Yeah. StarCraft.
I'm like, you cannot have millions of users if this thing sucks. It's great. Yeah. It's super
Age
good.
of Empires.
Oh, Age of Empires was the shit. Yeah. Dude, I remember, like, you got to go get your wood. You got to harvest your copper. You got to fucking...
It was Sellers of Catan before Sellers of Catan.
Yeah, it was so great. But I'm like, I think that's the thing now. Is just starting to realize, like, man, people are not only just one thing, but like, there's so many cool things you just don't know about.
And well, and like, I think passion is intoxicating in general. So like, I have like a bunch of like go-to questions I ask people when we're like getting to know them. Yeah, like call them dating questions or whatever. But I don't like bullshit, and so like I like asking probing questions that help like people discover. It's like one of them, Amy and I both ask a lot of times with people that we're just meeting. It's like, oh, what's the best concert you ever been to? Because there's usually like more in that question. Mm-hmm. So like
it's a Ted Lasso line.
Is it?
He says it and he goes best concert, worst concert.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And like one of the best concerts, maybe not the best, but one that comes up often is we saw Macklemore at Climate Pledge Arena when he at the end of his Heist tour, and I wasn't a big Macklemore fan then, and I'm not a big Macklemore fan now. Like I don't listen to Macklemore. But the actual concert itself was a really unique experience because it was really clear right off the bat that he was like passionate about performing, passionate about music, that he was about more than making money and climbing a like social ladder. It was really clear throughout the concert that he cared about the fans. He cared about the people that were there. He talked about addiction and how music helps him with that. And so we left that concert not as Macklemore fans, but as like people feeling like we could do whatever we wanted to do. Like we felt inspired.
Yep.
And not in the same way that he was inspired. We weren't like, we want to, that's it, head into the studio, record some tracks. It was like,
just get this EP out.
Yeah, it was just you gain passion by osmosis sometimes. So when you're around other people that are passionate, I think there's a couple options. You can either choose something else to be passionate about, or like feel bad that you don't have something to be passionate about.
Sure.
I think those are usually two things that confront people when they're around someone who's passionate about, which I think kind of goes back to some of why people give people shit for things that they maybe don't think is cool, is because when you're around someone who's passionate about something, if you aren't, it's an
indictment
critique
in some way. Yeah,
yes.
It's kind of an indictment on like, well, you just are only bullshitting because you don't have anything to care about.
Yes. And so if it's easier for them to be like, that's stupid, than it is for them to be like, why don't I give a shit about anything that much?
Right.
Why is there nothing in my life that I'm that excited about? Like it's that clip from Knocked Up, when Paul Rudd and Seth Rogen are sitting at the park, and Paul Rudd's kids are like losing their mind over bubbles, and he's like, "Oh, I wish I cared about anything as much as my kids care about bubbles." And it's like this, like said in this defeatist type of way, like, not that they love bubbles so much of what's important, but what is an indictment of him is his kids can find great joy and simplicity
and passionate
and he's miserable.
No, I think it's actually really, I think, a bigger thing now, maybe more than ever, that like you have the opportunity to engage with so many things too. So it's almost like double this thing as it was before, because like you wouldn't know a lot. I mean, pre-internet, and also even once the internet was around, I just think that now the way the internet functions, like you can access and get exposed and participate in so many things that you never really even knew about. So like it almost feels like, what are you doing that you're not engaging in culture enough to have found something? Like when you were younger, what was the dorkiest thing that you were super into?
The dorkiest thing that I was super
like back
into.
then, someone would have been like, "It's fucking lame." Like what you're doing right now, like what you're into, this is lame.
Probably like reading, like.
The fact that there's people out there like, you fucking reading? like idiot?
No,
like,
I remember being embarrassed about like when people would be like, what do you really like to do? And they'd be like, oh man, I like to fucking, like, and they weren't saying fucking, but
we were. I don't know what school you went to.
Middle
high
school?
Oh yeah, man, we were getting wild. I was getting in trouble.
But are you talking about middle school or like?
Yeah, middle school.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess by middle school. But like by middle school, like I loved sports, but I also really loved to read. I loved Lord of the Rings, and I loved fantasy, and I really enjoyed reading. I still really enjoy reading. And now, I heard a quote a while back that the things that when you're young you want to fit in, and when you're older you want to be unique. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting that like when you're young, when you're growing into yourself, what you're looking for is to belong, and the quick way to belong is to fit in. And then eventually you theoretically grow out of that, and you are like, no, I want to find something.
Yeah. I mean, I might twist the saying. It's probably intended to be like, when you're young, you want to belong, and when you're older, you want to be yourself.
Yeah.
Because I think in the sense that when you're younger, like you like to read, but there's shame associated with what is innately unique about you, which is that you like to read. And when you get older, that pursuit of uniqueness is only to say, the unique person that Nate Stone is, I want to be myself.
And when I was young in middle school, it wasn't cool to be like smart. I know it sounds stupid, but do you disagree? Like at middle school,
I would
were
say,
you like,
no, were
the cool kids the smart kids, or were the cool kids the kids that like were really good at sports or
Man, it's
wore
tough
really
for me.
cool
Like,
clothes.
I really
or,
I fucking revere. Like, call me a weirdo, dog. Like, I revered the smart kids in my school. Like,
Okay.
I remember there was a girl calling. Like, I was good at spelling. Words was always my jam. And we had spelling bee, and there's this girl, Colleen McKinney, fucking diced me. I was second place, but diced me, and I revered her. I was like, so fucking smart. I remember thinking it was so cool. There was a
How
kid
old
in
were
our
you?
class, Kevin Dick. I think he went to like MIT or some shit.
Oh.
And I was like, he just was staggeringly brilliant. Math was his thing. Could recite like some just gobs of numbers past pi or whatever. Like he just had, it was just brilliant. But then there were people that were like this kid, Pat Reed, who fucking was like, became an archaeologist. I just always revered people. Like, so the thing is, I would say this. You like that thing you're describing, I never fit. So once I moved schools and we ended up in Woodinville, I just didn't fit. Because I was now the black kid that was in this area. I was one of a kind. And there was a bunch of social stereotypes and pressures to be something that perhaps I was or wasn't, right? And I felt them. But there was also a lot of consequences for being certain things. So like, and I think what I figured out very quick was you just can be yourself. And I got shit for it all the time. But I remember feeling like so happy doing the shit I was doing. Like I fucking tap danced, bro. I took ballet in like middle school and high school.
Yeah.
No one thought it was fucking cool. I loved it.
Yeah.
You know? But I loved it so much that I was willing to do it like at an assembly in front of the whole school. And even if people thought I was quote unquote at that time, there were, you know, insults about whether my sexuality or my
absolutely.
whatever. I just still was never going to stop it because I already knew, like, I'm damned if I do, damned if I don't. Me not doing this doesn't suddenly enable me to access or fit in.
Yeah.
So it was like, I got two choices. I'm either going to like my life or not, and I knew playing that game because I tried. And, you know, you would sit down at the lunch table and you catch them on the back end of a conversation where they were just ripping you apart. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or you would go someplace and discover very quickly you weren't welcome. Or I'd walk into a party and I'd get challenged by a cat who'd be like, Lewis, you're wearing a button-up collared polo and you're wearing a baseball cap with a do-rag. This is pre-Kanye. This is pre-fucking 50 Cent. And he was like, pick one. You're either prep or you're fucking street. I don't know, whatever corny shit was said. And I was like, I'm me, dog. So this is what I'm going to wear. And at the time, that felt authentic.
Yeah.
And guess what? Turned out to be a fashion hit down the road a decade.
Mm-hmm.
And the point was like, I just remember all on the way always wanting to be who I was and being unique and being I fucking love Shakespeare. I would be so excited to write poems and to talk about it. I was always the kid that was just like, I'm going to fucking be myself. But that's because, not because I was some genius person who was like really skillful at being myself. It's that there was so many consequences on either side that what I was able to divine, not through intelligence or even, you know, self-awareness, it was just the less pain was on the side of being exactly what I was and being interested in exactly what I was into. So I had friends, like I was in 8th grade and I was in the Pokemon Magic the Gathering club. Like I would go play sports on the basketball team or the wrestling team, and I would leave and I would go to my teacher's classroom and we would bust out Magic cards with a bunch of other kids and play Pokemon and whatever. Because that felt good. And I didn't care whether other people liked it. And I knew they did. I knew they think it was dorky. But I loved walking around school and knowing everybody's face. And knowing, like, the Mad Helgesons of the world and the, you know, whatever. And being like, what's up, dog? And we would talk about fantasy. This cat was reading Wheel of Time back in 8th grade. Like, this was a pro. You know what I mean? This cat was a pro. So I felt that. But I do think you're right. As I've gotten older, that's only deepened. But I don't think I got the luxury. And I think it's a luxury in some ways, and also it can be a hamstring. But I never got the luxury of being liked for who I was.
Yeah.
So I never tried. And then when I did try, it went so bad that at a certain point, I was like, fuck it.
It just wasn't worth it.
It's not worth it. I'm going to be into what I'm into. The people who dig me are going to find me. And that's how it's going to work. So
would you say some of that, like, pain and trauma you've now kind of leveraged into confidence in being who you are?
Oh, absolutely. I think
like you wouldn't choose the pain and trauma.
No, I would never choose that. The person would have to learn that being yourself is probably the only thing you'll ever be good at by hurting. You think it would be something that teaching institutions, parents, and broader culture would affirm that we benefit from people uniquely being who they are. Following and chasing the things that move you, inspire you, make you excited about being alive, that fulfill you, like, and just doing that. But I think for me, it was like that trauma definitely got to a point where I was kind of like, oh, you start to get really good at dealing with the hatred and the dislike. And what you discover down the road is just like anything. Oh, everybody gets their turn in the shit. Everybody pays for being who they are. And once you see it, you start realizing like those people that were in those positions of authority to kind of ridicule you or fuck with you at one point in your life, that power system falls apart in a different way.
Yeah.
It's exactly what nerddom is now. There was a time when you could slam the kid with the fucking new run of, Frank Miller comics up against his locker and bitch him up. You might still be able to do that to a point, but then you're eventually going to be walking around a major city and see a cat in a Ferrari and be like, what do you do? And he's going to be like, I'm a nerd. And that's what we get paid now.
Yeah.
That's how life works now. My ability isn't just like a thing I am because whatever, it's also because it's now wildly celebrated. And the people that we would assert fame to, like the Chris Hemsworths of the world, these gorgeous, beautiful people, the Chadwick Bosemans, the Chris Evanses, they're the superheroes.
Yeah.
They were probably the cats back in the day slamming that kid in the locker.
Yeah.
Because you're like, you're now this guy.
Or like Tom Holland. I mean, Tom Holland is a different example of that because Tom Holland talks about like he practiced ballet and dance and theater when he was young and got shit for it. And then now he's athletic and jacked and
he's got one of the baddest in the whole world.
Yeah.
It's all working.
And highly successful. And it does, I wonder if he would say something similar, like he just decided, it does seem like he just decided he was going to be himself at a pretty young age. And which is probably why also, like, if you hear him I mean, who knows from afar, but when you hear him interviewed, he does seem to have a certain level of
self-assuredness.
Yeah.
Self-assuredness.
Yeah, I think he just knows
kind of
who
what
he
I'm
is.
doing.
Yeah, he just kind of seems to know who he is, and he's like people still give him shit because they're like, how did this guy pull Zendaya? And he's
I could have told you that.
And he's like, I don't know, we met and I liked her, and
I think he's also like super. Like the other thing you get good at is the more that you you get good at whatever you practice. So what you end up feeling like over time is infinitely more authentic, and you feel more authentic to the people around you.
Yeah, and you attract who you are, and so she, by all accounts, again from afar, seems to be a fairly genuine, authentic, cerebral person. She seems to be thoughtful. She seems to care about other people around her and how they experience her, and so a person like that isn't drawn into a celebrity just because they're a celebrity.
Right.
In fact, someone like that would bristle against a celebrity or a person who feels anything other than authentic. And so, since authenticity is fairly rare, Tom Holland is dabbling in fairly shallow waters.
Yeah.
Like, there aren't a lot of people, probably particularly in that universe, that are the way that they are. So anyway, but kind of back to what you're like, just kind of circling back, he seems like someone who at an early age was like, I like ballet, so I'm going to do ballet. And guess what? Now I can do a fucking backflip. And you know what you need to be able to do backflip for? It's the Spider-Man roll. So joke's on you guys.
And also, too, like you have to know how to embody a character that is insecure. You have to embody a character like that's the whole thing with Peter Parker, because he's not accepted.
Yeah.
He is ridiculed.
He's a misfit, yeah.
He is the nerd. How would you know that? Like, how can you embody that character well? It's like, well, I lived it. I remember what it's like.
Yeah.
And that's so easy to now transit on screen because you're like, I've been through that. And I think everybody, if we're super honest, everyone's been through that in some way or another in their life, where you tried to be who you were and it got rejected. Whether that's because of a girl you tried to pursue, a job you thought you were well qualified for, a friend you wanted to make.
Or early
or
on
even
in the
endeavor.
house, in the home, like a dad who is trying to, I think in past generations especially, have their sons fit really narrow views of masculinity. And so things like not crying and being tough and playing with certain toys and wearing certain colors and doing certain things with your hair and just a way of moving about the world. There are times for sure in which your father, for a boy, would have a massive impact on what you can and cannot be at an early age.
Totally.
And making that sandbox, depending on your upbringing, that sandbox potentially really small. Play in.
Oh, I think especially the more masculine your culture is, I would argue if you're a first generation or an immigrant, I would say if you're definitely even like lower income with a driven set of parents. Yeah, all those things. Like when you see the world sees you. Dress well, look a certain way. Yes, ma'am, no, sir. Like all the manners and all those systems we got, but it even went beyond that, like you're saying, into like what you should be interested in, what you should care about, how you should perform. And yeah, I think that is in some ways can be helpful because there are rules in culture, and it's important to understand those manners, etc., ways of being that are useful. But there's other ways that are simply arbitrary, and they're like, and that's where I think those feelings hurt. Those are some of the most painful things, because one of the most fascinating things about humankind is that who knows why I give a shit about the things I give a shit about. Like, who knows why?
Yeah.
It doesn't, there's no explanation for it, especially when it's so disparate from what people in my family, like my son, perfect example. I love being outdoors. I love the outdoors. I don't love it 1/10 that
Yeah.
Huck does. And I
remember
certainly gave
when
him the
we-
namesake, but it is it is like that thing where I'm like, who knows why for you catching a frog or a fish or a snake or a blah blah, it engenders in you the same sensation that I had in winning a game of one-on-one in basketball, of being able to do a really complex tap sequence, of being able to, hit a new breakdance move or whatever. Like, those things really matter to me, and nobody knows why. So the problem with that kind of suppression on it is you shrink that unique capacity and ability that lives in people if you don't let them access whatever that weird spark is. And especially for the spiritual communities of the world, you would innately think they would have recognized that, like, this is the broad and everly complex nature of a omniscient and omnibenevolent being bestowing upon each living being a purpose and an ability, And so, like, the sequestering or the suppression of those things, you would think, at least in my view, would be like, you're killing the divine part, the part that no one has control of and no one knows where it comes from and no one knows where it goes. Why my stepdad know when he was 9 years old that he wanted to be not just a doctor but a neurologist? And it happens to be socially rewarded, so he did it. But if you said it, like, those kids, like, how many people have I seen now that are like, I just wanted to, make these weird videos. And now in this modern era, you can, and you can win doing it. Like, this is the era to let people run and kind of be whoever they are. There's a market everywhere, Do you feel like that? Do you feel like for you growing up, what was the areas that you were like, dude, these are my passions, these aren't accepted? Or as you've gotten older, where do you feel like you're like, you know what? These are my passions now, and I feel like I'm able to really pursue them and see the good in them. Like that uniqueness thing, where you just feel like you get to really be yourself. Do you feel like that exists now?
Yeah, I think what's interesting about passions are our systems don't help people find them to begin with.
Okay.
So I think, and if you're going to find what you're passionate about, maybe it's a little bit better, but at least growing up, you're swimming in murky water, because all of our systems are from our education systems to our working class to our money makers.
Sure.
they're not asking questions that help us identify what we're good at or what we care about, because usually they're the same. Usually the things that we're really good at are also the things we really enjoy.
Yeah, often.
And
you like to be good. Humans like to be good at stuff.
Yeah.
So it's like usually the thing you can pursue.
Yeah, what's rewarded, it gets repeated, right? And so but like growing up, I wasn't asking questions like, what am I good at? What do I care about? And I was asking questions about what helps me not be poor, right? Like, what are the high earnings? So, like, I remember, like, manipulating those, like, I don't know if you ever took those, like, job tests where they, like, I remember trying to be like, how do I manipulate this? And so that the answers I get are
lawyer, doctor, titan of industry,
pilot. Like, those were all the, like, so I'd take these tests, and I'd almost always come up with, like, even these long tests, I remember being like, yep, says I should be an earner. And the reality is, in hindsight, I would have been a terrible lawyer. I don't have the focus that is required for someone to be a lawyer, to like sit and read book upon book and of legal stuff.
Precedent,
like, it's hard for me to read like a 2-page document like that. So I would have been awful at that. There's things about being a doctor that I think I would have been really good at, but similarly, like, that attention to detail is not my personality, right? And there's a lot of data around how our education systems are really, really bad at creating entrepreneurs and really, really good at creating cogs.
Yep.
And so I've always felt like a little bit of a misfit, outsider. Like I never fit into a certain system or machine. I don't operate well in those systems. I did really poorly in college. I think in large part, one, because I was young. I was too young. I started at UW. I went to UW and University of Washington but I was 17 when I started.
Did you do a running start?
No, I skipped a grade early on.
You're just so fucking smart.
I tested in, and
So you were so smart. They were
so
like,
when I made the transition from private school to public school, I had to take like a test,
Sure.
to see like where I was academically, and
Yep.
I tested 2 grades above, and so they were like, oh, he shouldn't do, at this point it was 8th grade, he shouldn't do, or it was 7th grade, he shouldn't do 7th grade, he should just move straight to 9th. So anyway, so I tested 2 grades up. I was small, but I liked sports, and so my parents were like, oh, let's just have him skip 1 grade, and so I skipped a grade, and so I'm a November birthday, and so like when I started, my freshman year of college in September, I was 17. I didn't turn 18 until it was late November, so until almost the first quarter was over. So I didn't have the emotional capacity or maturity to be around a bunch of people like trying to be adults. And then I just didn't know how to like fit into those like systems, to go to class, to study. Like it sounds like really
Right.
trivial things, but I don't remember studying like hardly at all in high school. Maybe like a couple times. I didn't study for SAT. Anyway, so but what I wish would have happened early on is people would have asked me questions and helped me discover like what I was good at, and then pointed me towards those directions. But the long answer to your short question is I don't feel like now at 38, I'm starting to figure out like what I'm good at and what I'm not. But I think that's also like constantly evolving. My role as like a business owner is you're constantly trying to figure out what you're good at and what you're not. And it's also, sometimes it's just really hard to be like, I think I'm good at this, but I don't know. I don't know for sure if I'm good at this, and you're dealing with so many variables. And since you haven't been doing it most of your life, it's hard to have a pulse on knowing what you're good at and what you're not good at and what you really care about.
Sure.
I know at this point like what I'm passionate about. Like I'm passionate about learning. I'm passionate about relationships. I'm passionate about using the tools in my toolkit to help make the world a better place in some capacity, and I'm not particularly concerned about the logistics of it.
Right.
But like what I hope from my kids, and I'm trying to cultivate my kids, is ask them questions that help them discover what they really enjoy and care about, and then helping them find jobs and career paths that match those. Whereas growing up, and I think this is probably the case for not all, but most of our generation, is those weren't the questions they were asking. They were like, hey, here's some safe job paths that would make sense for you. Or in some cases, like I don't remember talking about like it at all as a kid.
No, I mean, I don't think my parents ever, I mean, they would ask. I just read this article, but I actually think it's true, which is that I don't know that it's very helpful or useful to ask children what they want to be when they grow up.
Me either.
I think what's way better, and what I find so much more joy in doing with Huck, is exposing them to actual unique and novel experiences they haven't had. So, like, you want to play hockey? Maybe yes, maybe no. But you also don't know. So, and the reason I do that is because for me, my mom signed me up for tap. I never like wanted to go be a tap dancer. And I was like, Mom, this is ridiculous. Everyone's going to make fun of me if I do this. This is blah, blah. And I was like, I don't care. I don't care. You're going to go do it for 4 weeks. If you don't like it for 4 weeks, then you're done. And I got in there, in one class, having never done it before in my life, and I always could dance. I always had rhythm. And the second I sat down, they put the shoes on my feet. And he goes, let's do this. And I was like, yeah, did it. Then he's like, okay, now do this. And I'm like in a class of people, and I'm like, what are we doing? This is so easy. And it wasn't because I was like some prodigy, but it was that I was absolutely naturally adept at it. Moving my feet in a rhythmic pattern I could always do. And then really quickly, after those 4 weeks, they're like, we think your son needs to move up like 3 years or so. He's incredibly quick at learning this. And I like, does he practice? And she's like, no. And I never did. I just could always remember it. I could always do it. I could always remember it. And that sensation, that sense of being good at something was so fulfilling for me.
Yeah.
And I could never have gotten it for myself because
Yeah.
my view of reality is so limited when you're a kid. And I would say even now as an adult, there's things that I look at and I certainly have aversions to and projections on, like why that won't be good for me. And I think in the same way when I do that, the difference with Huck, because I don't think that's helpful, with Huck is I just go like, we're going to try it.
Yeah.
We're going to try it. And if you're like, buddy, I don't like it, like, cool. Like, what if, like, you do jujitsu, you do wrestling, you do an art class, you do an acting class, you do a singing class, you do some instruments, you do every sport that's available to you that I can get you signed up for. And then we do really other things that are super weird. We go out and we hike, we take pictures, we make little videos together, we do podcasts, we, all kinds of things to get him to try to wake up. And my dad always talks about this too at a genetic level, which is fascinating, is that they used to think that your genes were hardwired, and now what they know through epigenetics is that that's actually not at all the case, that genes are that a certain bank of genes, and in particular ones that are related to interest, talent, and potential are like light switches, that you have to create the stimulus first for the gene to turn on. Otherwise, it just lies dormant. So based on this theory, my stepdad's like, what they now know about how genes work is that the greatest guitar player never played a guitar. He never picked it up. The greatest sprinter never ran a race. The greatest artist never painted because they were never exposed. And so the genes were like, we're not turning on. Now, those things are largely heritable, but there are anomalies all the time inside the human genome. Diversity is variation is part of the game. So you can't know what your kid's capable of.
Yeah.
And as for yourself, you don't know what you're capable of till you try something. Like I would tell someone that even has a passion for singing that goes, well, I can't sing. Well, it's like, well, have you seen a vocal coach?
Yeah.
Because then, like, if you see a vocal coach, you might discover, like, oh, they might go like, no, we can figure this out. And there's a way to learn to mechanically sing that all of a sudden you might discover, like, you're really good at it. Or you're good enough to where you feel very enlivened by it. And I think that's the other part of when you talk about school and trying to make kids into cogs. I think it's a little bit also, too, of, like, the earning potential on something. Like, do you remember when we were young? Yeah. It was like an art degree was like, you're fucking out of your mind. You're going to lose every penny.
I mean, anything other than the things we described.
Right.
Are like, hey, like, those were like number one. It's like a draft.
Right.
Your parents are like, all right, if we're going to pick,
yes,
we want you to be one of these 5 things.
Yes.
If not, then here's some other options. Maybe you can be an electrician.
Sure.
But they weren't like philosophy, history, art. And that's part of capitalism, right? Is capitalism rewards producers, right. And if you can't immediately monetize or quantify a thing, then it isn't worth time. I also think, like, kind of what you were saying, like, well, one, there's a whole other conversation about what equity then looks like, right? Because there's all these kids with latent potential for any number of infinite skills that are in homes or environments or communities where certain things aren't accessible. And there's like drastic examples like crew, right? Crew has a really high barrier to entry, which is why
lacrosse,
hockey these are all really
soccer
yeah, soccer. So,
which
like,
is funny because that's the world's game.
Yeah, so like one thing, like I met a guy a while back, and his job in California is he works for a nonprofit that's essentially they try to make things more equitable for soccer, because what happens is communities with money just buy out fields in communities that don't, and then the communities that should be able to use those soccer fields because they're theoretically their local soccer fields aren't able to use those soccer fields because a school in Beverly Hills has rented it. And so there's just a lot of inequity that just means that all these kids essentially are being robbed of opportunities, either directly or indirectly. So there's a whole like equity conversation in that as well. And the other thing similar to what you're saying is, for our kids, it's not just giving them access to, Amy and I talk about this, it's not just giving them access and exposure to new things, but also teaching them not to quit right away is always a unique balance. Like we have this conversation all the time, like how much do we make our kids participate in a thing before we let them quit it? Because there's also an element in which sometimes the things that we're good at, we're bad at initially.
At first. That's totally the case.
Right? So in order to discover whether or not you're actually good at it, it might actually require more than just, like a 1-bite rule. Like we have a 2-bite rule at our house. You got to try some with 2 bites, for food. So for the the other side of things, like the how much do you, like for our parents' generation, it might be like you're going to do it even if you don't like it forever.
Right.
Like there's plenty of people you could be like, well, I played piano for 8 years,
I
hated every minute of it,
Yeah.
wasn't good. My parents made me do it. So where's the balance there as a parent? Is a question Amy and I ask a lot. Is like, okay, what's the balance here? The balance is like, maybe like sometimes it's an arbitrary number, like 4 weeks. You're like 4 weeks. A month is long enough, or sometimes it's like, we signed you up for this class. It is 6 weeks long. You're going to do all 6 weeks. And afterwards, if you really don't like it, then we'll talk about it. And then the other thing similar to exposure is back to kind of what I was saying earlier. It's sometimes hard to figure out what you're good at. Sometimes you know right away.
Yep.
And sometimes you're like, I think I'm good at that thing, but I'm not precise. I'm not sure. And so we need people in our lives to kind of identify it for us sometimes, and be like, what I noticed is you're really good at blank.
A, B, and C. Yep.
Yeah. And once someone says that, we're like, oh, really? Or on the flip side, be like, hey, I noticed this seems to be like something that like you just really don't enjoy. Why don't you just stop doing it? And so I think we need to be able to have those authentic conversations with the people around us, and be able to surround ourselves with people that we trust their input. Like we've talked before, but like we all have this board of directors theoretically, and some of us have like really shitty boards, and everyone on there is just a doofus and like doesn't have actually good input or insight, and we shouldn't be listening to any of them.
Right.
That's the Circuit City board of directors.
Right.
And if you're not familiar with Circuit City, it used to be like Best Buy, and now it's like doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right. Like they fumbled the bag, so to speak.
Right.
As the kids say. And then some people have really good boards where they're like, all right, everyone on here has a unique voice and fills a unique role and has good advice, which is like what I've tried to do in my life, is surround myself with what I see as like a good board of directors. So they can help me identify, even at 38, hey, I think you're really good at this. I think this isn't something you're as good at, and that's okay. Just don't do it. Just don't do it, or don't spend your time on it. We have a rule in our family that if you think something kind, you have to say it out loud. And for our kids, it's usually something physical.
Oh, for sure.
Right? They're like, like Canada being, I like your earrings, like your
hair,
I like your hair. And the important thing for us is just that they mean it. But as an adult, ideally, those observations become more meaningful, and they move beyond, the physical to the internal or even spiritual, if you want to go that far. And so like I told you the other day, I think I told you in our intro, like I think you're the best encourager I know, and that is a skill. It's something that you're naturally good at. It isn't like you've practiced it, and you also are at a space in your life where usually what prevents us from being encouraging, I think, is insecurity. Right? We're like, either we're worried that it won't be received well, or that it might sound weird if we say it, or even if they're that I'm not, is that a reflection of me? Like if I say they're good at it.
There's like a scene in The Office where Michael Scott has this thing where he I can't remember, like he's making fun of Pam or something like that, or Oscar, he's like making fun of Oscar, and then he leans over and he goes, Oscar's a wonderful employee, incredibly devoted, and he's brilliant, but I'd never tell him that. Or it's like he does going to say to me, because Oscar looks at him and goes, why wouldn't you tell them that? But it's like, that is like that sense of like giving people their roses is a thing that I have, and I don't know where it came from, but it is absolutely been a part of my core personality for a long time. Where I've just really wanted the people around me to feel so strong and capable. I'm never tired.
I wonder if any of that ties back to your experience of not being able to be yourself. And you just got to a point where like, why wouldn't I tell someone if I enjoy a thing about them?
I think it's definitely, it's possibly part of it. It's hard to know all the things moving me. I do think the one thing is that I look around in the world, and I know my own life, and I know the lives of my family and friends, and I know that like, I just think human beings are so much tougher and so much more capable, and have so many big things buried in them. Like I always think about this. Like it sounds weird. It's going to sound very weird probably to some people, but like for me, I know that for all the generations that slavery was occurring, that buried inside all of those lives was brilliant musicians, businessmen, teachers, makers, engineers, artists, and they were made to pick cotton and live and die. But that in those genes were all of those things. And so I think I look around at people and I'm like, I don't know the world that's inside you, but I do know that there's something in there that is super valuable and so important, and it has nothing to do with me. So I think sometimes what happens too is that there's too much comparison and connectivity in the way that goes, well, what you have I might not have, and what I whatever, instead of going like, that's a one of a kind.
Yeah.
I'm a one of a kind.
Right.
We're not in comparison. So yes, body wise, that's the world that I think is probably really tricky, because that is something that we do share, is we kind of have these meat bags, and they're different, these little meat sacks, and they're different. As far as once you get rid of that and we get into the world of consciousness, that's a one of one consciousness. That's a one of one set of experiences and inputs and outputs. And that's like a thing that I just feel in some ways is separate from me, but I can connect to it in that we have shared emotion. We have shared oftentimes value or belief. And that shared emotion makes me go like, I bet you want to feel strong. I bet you want to feel powerful. I would bet you want to feel like what you have to offer counts and matters.
Yeah.
So not saying it to someone and not celebrating when people win and not wanting to see them flourish and win, to me feels so odd. It's like, to me it feels no different than when you watch like one of those National Geographics and the fucking like, they follow like a little rodent and a snake's trying to get it, and then the rodent like scraps and gets out. You're kind of like, yes, because you in some way.
Yeah. You want the victim to win, or
in some way, you're kind of like, you're rooting. And I think what I think is that everybody's an underdog.
Yeah.
I feel like almost everybody's an underdog. Like, yes, if I bump into someone who is walking into a multi-million-dollar fortune in their 20s and they're an heir to blah, blah, I'm like, you're not an underdog.
Yeah.
But like my community, the people I know that they're fighting battles.
Or
So
they
I
are
kinda
in their
just-
own way. Like, this is like...
Yes,
like,
I'm not trying to say
no,
you're
no,
not,
no.
but you get what I mean.
I don't feel bad for that person necessarily, but like, like I have a weird thing where like I always defend young famous people, whether
Okay.
it's Justin Bieber or John Morant.
Okay.
Because I think for the most part, systems create people, not the other way around.
Okay.
So if you're young and wealthy and famous, I think it's almost impossible to be a good human in that scenario.
Hard to be.
It's really difficult.
Because it was hard to be a good person back when you were 22 anyways.
Yeah.
You just don't know enough.
100%.
You're incidentally walking around, even maybe unintentionally.
And it's a
hurting
reason.
people.
It's a reason why historically, for every good, for most human history, you had either tribal leaders or kings, right? And those were the decision makers. And historically, they're almost all shitty. Like, there's very few like good ones. They're
That's
like
true.
Bad. Not awful, but not great.
Yep.
Bad. Okay. I mean, very few. You're like, this was a.
It's kind of like Marcus Aurelius and like maybe one or two more.
Yeah, but if you meet Marcus Aurelius too, he's also
He's a
not
warlord.
perfect.
Yeah, he's a warlord.
Yeah, he's a warlord,
Yeah.
and he believes in he definitely believes in stations. He definitely believes in hierarchy. He definitely believes in male supremacy. I mean, he's got some really interesting thoughts, and he's got some real bummer ones too.
Oh no, for sure.
And that's
but in
just,
terms of, I think what I'm saying is in terms of a person who, in that era, for the breadth of knowledge he could have, he is unique in Rome's history.
Yes.
If you take all the leaders and you're like, we're running you against the norm.
Yes.
You stick out.
Yeah.
And you'd be like, oh, okay. Of the bunch,
Yeah.
you're the best one.
Yeah.
Maybe.
The rest of you are like,
after that, it gets real bad.
Yeah, you got Nero who's just like killing people for funsies, like feeding people to lions.
Yeah.
It's like,
But again, to your argument, young dudes.
Yeah, real life Joffreys.
Yeah, bro.
Like Game of Thrones, Joffrey's an awful character. That's what most of the kings probably would have been like.
Dude, you could never hand a 15-year-old kid
Absolute power
and expect anything. I remember, dude, not to get on The Office too, but it just reminded me of this one thing where Michael's like, when he's like, kids are the best. You give them food, you give them candy, you let them live their lives, for God's sake. If a baby was president, there would be no war, there would be no, well, there'd probably be no government. Probably a better screenplay idea than a real one. But it's like all of a sudden as you start to walk out, youth and power, you start to go, there's a lot of folly in youth that isn't even necessarily inherently like this person has a bad core. Obviously, Joffrey has a bad core. But at the same time, what is worse gets affirmed in some way. Well, in the sense that you can at least escape it. So when you're Joffrey, right, to use that example, and butcher your whole family because you pissed me off at dinner. There are no consequences for that sort of vindictiveness.
Yeah.
When you're in elementary school, if you steal someone's lunch or you throw it in the garbage or you wreck their paper, you might get hit in the mouth at recess.
Well, even there's
and
peer
you
pressure.
might learn whatever.
Well, even in preschool, there's pressure to share. Like, there's a lot of data
right.
about how like kids don't share until they get into preschool.
You're not naturally empathetic.
Yes,
Yeah.
and then they get into preschool environments, and they're like Maverick right now is 3, and he shit at sharing. And how we were kind of joking with his, upcoming preschool teacher, and she's like, he'll figure it out once he's in the room. The peer pressure is too strong.
Sure.
Because they're like, they see how their peers engage with each other and how they're rewarded by being kind and sharing and how it's reciprocal. And then they just automatically figure out that sharing is a part of human experience unless you're a king or queen and you don't have to share it all. But the whole thing is, I always come to the Justin Bieber, the John Morant's defense, because I'm like, why would these young men make good decisions?
Shane, do you mind if we wait on that? Is that okay? Just for a little bit? We're almost done, my man.
Yeah, we are.
What time is it? Oh, yeah. Perfect. So start that one part over. You said I root for.
Yeah, I root for, or even this is going to be polarizing, but have you seen any of that Carl Lentz documentary?
Yes.
On Hillsong?
Yes.
It's a bummer. It sucks. I also I don't know if he's a bad guy or the system created a guy that's going to make really bad decisions.
I just think you cannot expect from a human being at almost any age that level. So the Justin Bieber levels, the Morant or the Carl Lentz level of fame, notoriety, and influence is so significant that the number of people you and I can probably name that we still don't know them. Right, we have no fucking clue about famous people in their life. But if we were to look out at the broader world and go, who do we think was really hitting it? It's very few. It's that hard. So I do think you're right that it is a systemic issue.
And social media has exacerbated it because now, you can even quantify influence with a number,
Absolutely.
right? 50 years ago, you'd be like, or 30 years ago.
Frank Sinatra's famous.
Or Michael Jackson's famous. But you couldn't look at a number and be like, oh, they're The Rock famous. Where The Rock has,
200 million followers or something.
Yeah, something insane, right? And I just don't think humans are cultivated and created to have that type of influence and power, which is why we handle it poorly historically. You can't point to a time in human history where you're like, oh, here's a time where the people that had a lot of power made really good decisions. They're anomalies, but as a rule, they don't. So I actually think that the miracle of a LeBron James, I'm more impressed by his personal life, honestly, than I am by his professional life. Yeah. It's a miracle that a 13-year-old boy who had a massive throngs of following and people who would have been no one around to tell him the truth for his entire upbringing, and he talks really authentically about not having a father figure. It's a miracle that guy has become what he's become, not just one of the best athletes of history, but also a business owner, an entrepreneur,
but still the same marriage,
a family
20
man,
years.
a same marriage. Yeah.
Kids are squared.
Yeah, and again, we don't know the inner workings
ins and outs,
of anything, but the fact that he's made it this far, and seems to be. Yeah.
I remember the biggest scandal with him in his whole career that I can really think of is when he had the H2 Hummer when he was in high school. That was a scandal.
Oh, yeah.
Where that money came from.
Yeah.
And then I think, obviously, the decision
to
leave Cleveland. These were the worst moments of his kind of public life that I'm aware of as a viewer.
And that's actually a great example, too, because he got crushed for the decision.
Yeah.
I remember being like, this dude's so whack.
Really?
Yeah, initially.
You didn't like it?
No.
I never cared.
Yeah.
And I found out that all the money went to poor kids, and I was sick.
I don't even remember that part.
Yeah, it was the whole thing that it raised money and it did something benevolent, I thought. I could be wrong, but I thought that was the whole thing, is that it did. And then I was like, oh, that's cool, whatever.
Yeah, and he also was 25.
Oh, God.
He's still a kid.
Yes.
So I just think it's a miracle that someone that's oh,
yeah,
cool. You made it to the top.
Yeah. And
you didn't crumble beneath it. I just think it's a miracle.
Yeah, it is, because I think one of the things is, and we'll get up out of here, but I think the one thing that I often think, and I think this kind of collective conversation has been around passion, being yourself, and also just the pitfalls, whether at the top of fame of being yourself or low just in your own regular life. Not low, but I mean just other in living a more traditional life without public notoriety. But I still think one of the things that like sticks out to me is I feel like that ability to achieve any sort of notoriety, and even in your own personal life, that ability to like be exactly who you are. And when we were talking about kids, right? How do you find out who you are? And how do you find the things that really speak to you, that move you, that make you feel valuable, that inspire you, you know? And then how do you see that in other people? How do you recognize it? How do you acknowledge it, right? Like, it's a really nuanced thing, the concept of the self and what you are. And it's hard because so much of us are, there's a part that shows up. Like, I think the data is from geneticists is roughly 75% of your personality is preformed. You have roughly 400 inborn characteristics, traits, and tendencies already squared away in your personality. And then that last like 25% gets built through exposure, trauma, you know, relationship, love, wins, failures, all that stuff.
It's malleable.
Yeah, but the hard part is that it's this never-ending discovery. And I think Carl Jung would say that like it is that process of discovering the self is such a challenging part of it. But I will say, and I'd be interested to get your take on it before we bolt, is that the work required to figure out not just in like vocation and hobby who you are, but to find it in the deepest way of who you are, like what you truly value, what you truly believe, and even the ability to look at yourself in the ways that you are ugly and like flawed and fucked up, and you know, whether that's, you know, short temper, like for me being, you know, emotionally reactive, or at times really overly intense, or, you know, instead of like shaming it, witnessing it and kind of observing it, so that you have some ability to pay attention to how it's impacting your life, affecting your life, and the way you're viewed. Not so that you can shift and not be who you are, so that you know what's in your way, so that you can live as authentic as you can with doing as little collateral as you can. And also along the way, hopefully helping and inspiring people to be the same. Because I don't think I ever walked through my life not waking up at least once a month like, dude, that was shitty. Like what you did there, that wasn't good, or whatever. And I think when I was younger, I would beat myself up, and it would be this slog of like, don't be this way, don't be this way. And it was never gonna happen.
Yeah.
Like it was like, don't talk so much. Don't have such a strong opinion. Don't feel like you need to fucking die on this hill and then make everybody a villain. Like, you know, whatever. And it's like, okay, that's true, and you should work at that, but also recognize like you're not gonna get rid of the part of you that was already in you. That was just like, oh, do this thing, have this way about you, treat people this way. I'm going to get up for that. I'm definitely going to be tuned up for that. And I'm not going to like, it's never going to go away. So then how do I not like kill it, but how do I hold that part of myself with like love so that I can access the best parts of it more frequently? You know what I mean? Like when I first met you, you were like, I got to be nicer. I was like, it's not about being nice.
No, when you first met me.
No, but I mean,
a few years later, I was like, I should start being
big
nice.
on that. And it wasn't that you weren't nice. You were always nice. That's why we were friends. I wouldn't have been your friend if you weren't.
Yeah.
You were always nice. It's just that the other side had less, it was unreined, maybe as well as it could have been. But it wasn't about that you weren't nice. And that inability to kind of see yourself accurately, to go, I am nice, and this is also here too.
Yeah, I'm nice 90% of the time, and 10% of the time, I'm reactive and I say things that are unkind.
But if you do that, that's a way stronger emotional and psychological place to begin the work of figuring out how to mitigate that 10%.
Yeah.
If what you have is a core belief that you are not nice, you're going to start to suffer a lot.
Yeah.
Because all you'll ever be able to pay attention to is every time you fail, and you'll miss the 90% of the time that you're really hitting it.
Yeah.
Do you agree?
Yeah, I do. And I think, you know, I think you were trying to like wrap up a little bit of what we ended up hitting.
Yeah.
And I think, I agree. I think it's a lot about authenticity. And I think what I would add to it, which is what we talk about a lot, is you need other people to help you become authentic, ironically. Like you can't just do it by yourself because our views are limited and we can only see what we can see. And so there's blind spots. And so I think a lot of my self-discovery phase didn't really ramp up until I found people in my life who liked me for me and gave me permission to not be perfect. So like an Amy. Amy's been really big in this. Amy was one of the first people I ever met that I would tell, like I would beat myself up in front of her. I'd be like, yeah, and I did this, and I'm like, I always think about how shitty that was, blah, blah, blah. And she would not excuse it, but be like, it makes sense that you would make that decision at that moment because of X, Y, and Z. And that decision isn't who you are. That's a decision you made, similar to what you were saying, right? And so until I had someone and multiple someones in my life, and growing up, that was my grandma. My grandma was always like, just thought I was the best person in the world. Always was the person that was like my biggest cheerleader. Mm-hmm. Now it's like well known that we have a really big family and everyone's just kind of accepted like I'm the favorite. I've always been the favorite. I always will be the favorite. And really to no credit of my own, I think she just at some point decided that her job was to build me up any and all the time. She still does. She's late 80s and she'll still call me and leave me a voicemail and tell me how much she loves me and tell me that every night. The last thing she does before she goes to bed is she looks at my picture and she prays for me. And like, so I think in order for us to identify who we are and live into who we really are, to be ourselves, because I'm guessing you had some of those people in your life too.
Sure.
I don't think we can, that inner voice is strong enough when we're growing up to do it on our own. We need outside voices, whether it's friends, family, teachers, whatever, to tell us who we are or point out who we are, the things that are already in there. Be like, hey, I don't know what you see. What I see is someone who's strong, someone who's kind, someone who wants to be the best version of themselves. I see someone who's really good at it, like I'm talking about you right now, who's really good at identifying the beauty in people, who is really good at telling people that they're interesting without telling people they're interesting. Like those things, we need those people in our lives. And the only way we do that is if we take risks and show up in some level of authenticity and risk, you know, like with Amy, like risk her rejecting me, which is a really terrifying thing, which is why I think it's really hard for us to do on an individual level, because in order for us to get what we need, we have to be who we are.
Oh, for sure.
And there's just no way around it. And so if we want to get what we need, we have to be who we are. And once we can be who we are, then we can start looking for people who will provide what we need. But in that process, we'll also run into people
who don't like it.
Yeah,
who don't like it.
Who don't like it. And one of the real unique challenges about that in friendship and relationships in general is the more we run into people who don't like it, the more we'll be told that who we are isn't okay. And the more we will think that relationships are transactions and we're ATMs, and that as soon as who we are does not bring joy or pleasure to other people, that it's not good enough. And that's not what I don't think friendships and relationships are supposed to be. Friendships and relationships are supposed to be this: I see who you are, I like that person, and I'm willing to journey with you as you live into that in both the good and the bad. I think is what ultimately most of us are looking for in all of our relationships, in our romantic relationships and our friendships.
I think it's such a great point. I think that's like probably the crux of the conversation, because whether it is the nerddom thing or sports or business or blah, blah, or whatever, whoever you are, whatever you're interested in reading, you know what I mean? That it's so true that the thing you did need was to read. The thing I did need to do was tap dance, and I needed to be able to be myself to get that thing and know that along the way people weren't going to agree and they weren't going to like it, and you were going to get made fun of and you were going to be ridiculed for it. And at the same time, I feel so elated and proud of myself that I was who I was. You know what I mean? Even in all its imperfection. The older I get, the more I'm just like proud of the moments where I was like, God, you really could have got your ass kicked right there, and you just didn't stop being yourself. Like that always makes me really, really happy. And in a weird way, it hurts in the moment, you know, to go through those experiences. And I think what's tough is when I look at some of these people, and especially like, you know, friends I have, younger guys I work with in the department, it is that, and people I know, it's just, I'm watching a lot of people struggle with how to be themselves all the time. And I think we're all fighting that battle. But the people that I do think are the happiest, that are the most fulfilled, whenever I think about them, I'm like, you're so yourself. That's like the first thing I feel when I'm with that person. You know, like when you're with your grandma, you're like, you are who you are.
Yeah.
You got there. Like you got to that place where you're like, oh, it's not perfect, but I'm good. I'm good with what's here. And that person is so settling. They're so like, they just emit like that kind of peaceful, balanced, like, it's all
Because
good.
she's so confident that I am a thing that I'm like,
She almost can't override it.
Yeah.
You're just like, I would love to doubt what you're saying. I don't think anything I could say could push you off.
No.
And that's when it gets through. Because you're like, you haven't said this to make me feel good. And you haven't said this to, like, for any sort of way other than you think
believe
this is
it.
true.
Yeah.
Like, you actually really think that. And I think that's to borrow, like, that little scene from Hook. It's exactly
See,
that.
Peter?
It's actually that sequence where he's like, I'm not who you're saying I am. And they're like, you are, dude. And he's like, no, you're not. And then eventually, right, what ends up converting him are those conversations with the Lost Boys,
Yeah.
right, with Tink, that over time he's able to kind of surrender his self-image that he's cropped up and built.
Yeah.
And, and realize, like, oh, I am this thing. And suddenly that awareness enables him to do all the things that he really needed, which if you looked at his
to
life,
become the hero.
He was reactive. He was pissed off and screams at the kids.
Yeah.
He's not happy in his work. He is putting everything into this one thing because it's giving him this false sense
He's
of, like,
successful.
adventure and whatever. And he's winning. He's getting paid
Yeah.
to be this thing. And then it's that recognition of, like, I am missing out on the life I truly want by playing this other thing that
I think I
is
have
that
to.
everybody will accept.
Yeah.
It's the part everybody will agree to. And the few people in my life who really give a shit about me, who actually love me, they see something so different. That's probably why it is so important that you and I, and maybe that's part of why I feel so incited when I'm with you and I'm watching you do something or I'm seeing what you're doing, where every moment of your career and life where you have been insecure, I have always felt truly and deeply that you had nothing to fucking be afraid of.
Yeah.
I just knew. I'm like, you're gonna fucking figure it out, dude. I know who you are. I know what you're capable of. I know how hard you work. I know how much people trust you and believe in you. I know how much you know that you can do. And if this little moment is just a part where the little insecure 8-year-old version of us, which lives in every one of us, gets to rear its head and have it say, the 8-year-old version needs to be reminded, like, calm down. Like, you're good the way you are.
Yeah.
Sit still and know that, like, the big me's got this.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you're right. The 8-year-old me, the 10-year-old me would be terrified right now. But, like, the bigger me's been able to do a lot of shit that
Yeah.
the little version of me would have never thought's possible.
Yeah.
And it's the coolest thing, too, I think, more than anything, to know that it feels that way for you, because I do, dude. Like, in the way you are, how you love your kids, your wife, how you treat me, how you do things in business, how you consider the people that work for you, and what you choose to fight against in the world is, to me, like, profoundly inspiring and so, like, who you fucking are. It's why you didn't fit other places. Like, I remember even, like, just back in the day, like, watching you do things and being like, yeah, you'll do this for a bit. It's not really who you are. And when you left, what we used to do, and you started doing what you were doing, I was like, that's money. That's exactly where you belong. Just scrapping and fighting on your own and figuring it out. Not on your own, but I meant, like, doing your own thing.
Yeah.
Your way. And I hope that you know that, like, that's always been an inspiration to me. Like, as I've encouraged you in certain ways, you going and executing has always been an encouragement to me. You, the way you love your family and your partner, is always an inspiration for what I could do. Maybe if I get in the right thing, if I get my shit together, my ducks in a row, maybe I'll be able to do the same thing. And it is probably no more complex than when Maya Angelou says, right, like, the great fear is not that you are powerful, right? The great fear is that you're powerful beyond measure. And that as you let another shine their light, and as you encourage someone to shine their light, it gives others permission to do the very same.
Yeah.
That, like, we have that awareness, like you said the other day, my great fear is that I can do nothing. My great fear is that I could do so much.
Yeah.
And that's truly that tension. But whenever we can inspire people, I think, and we can push them, and even ourselves, to that place of going, like, what do you love? What do you care about? Blah, blah. What's really the truth here? Then, yeah, I think the best things happen. And not only that, your life, like you said, I think that's probably the smartest thing I would say this whole podcast, which is in order to get the thing you need, you would have to be who you are. You know what I mean? Like, you can't be someone else and then do what they, quote unquote, say is good. And then you get down the road like, this really didn't mean that much to me. What a fucking bummer. I wish I'd just done the thing I really cared about. I wish I was with the person I truly loved. I wish I pursued this path. And yeah, man, it's really cool to watch you do it. And it's always going to be an inspiration for me. So
Appreciate that.
yeah, man.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like I should say nice things too.
No,
but that's
no,
part
you
of
already did. No, you already did. You already did. You already did. Well, dude, thanks so much for doing it. I don't know what would we call this first episode?
I mean, be true to thyself. Know thyself. I mean, there's lots of,
All right.
I think, stuff
Dude,
in
that's
there.
my core motto. That's the next tattoo I'm getting.
Okay.
Yeah, this above all, Shakespeare.
Yeah.
To thine own self be true.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I think that's, I think we do a lot of. I mean, we can keep on talking. We should wrap up, but
Yeah.
just so much of our work is inside out, and so I think knowing yourself and not just knowing, I think it goes beyond knowing yourself, right? It's loving yourself. Like self-love is probably an overused phrase these days, but your ability to love yourself is your cap on your ability to love others.
For sure.
You will not be able to love other people well if you don't first love yourself. Because if you're constantly living in self-critique, why wouldn't you live in other critique?
Yeah.
Right? You'd look through that lens where you're constantly finding things you don't enjoy about other people. So know thyself, something along those lines. I mean,
Okay.
I don't know. I think the other thing I think about a lot is I think most of us live in this tension. It's just another way to say what you said of worrying that we're either too much or not enough.
For sure.
I like swing back and forth those all the time.
Core messages, bro. Those are core messages.
I'm like, am I too much or am I not enough? Am I too much or am I not enough? And it's the nice thing to know about them is they're both lies because we both worry about both of them and they can't both be true.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So if they can't both be true, then they must both be false. And so if we can find a way to be ourselves and put ourselves in environments around people that love us for who we are,
Then we hit the Goldilocks zone.
That's
right.
Not too much, and we are enough. We can
Not too hot, not too cold.
Yes.
Just right.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in order to do that, we gotta try some things, just like Goldilocks did, right?
Yeah.
She had to try a lot of things.
Yep. And that's a really good way to put it. I would have never thought of it, but that's good. That's some good shit. Yeah, no. Well, dude, before we bounce out of here, maybe talk about like the first book or the first video game or something like that you read, that played or whatever. The first nerddom thing that you were like,
easy. The Hobbit. It's the first book I read that felt like it transported me to another universe. Like,
Really?
The Hobbit was like, and I think what The Hobbit does that's really interesting to me still, it's one of the first, I definitely gave The Hobbit to Huck when he was born.
oh, I have it. We've been reading
The
it.
illustrated version?
Yes, it's sick.
So it's a book I give to every parent, especially if they're going to have a son, because it's a different universe, but what it's ultimately about is it's about belonging. And it's about taking risks that scare you in order to discover who you are. I mean, full circle, like the story of Bilbo Baggins is a story of someone who doesn't know who they are, is wildly insecure, angry, bitter, unkind, empty relationships, heading nowhere. He's challenged with new people that he doesn't have a lot in common with or doesn't feel like he has a lot in common with that put him out of his comfort zone in real tangible ways that make him feel like he's out of control or remind him that he's out of control in this big wide world that he's trying to protect himself from. And because he chooses to be brave, which almost all of our stories fit this mold, because he chooses to be brave, he ends up discovering the truth about him, that he is a gangster, right? That he like can do all these things that no one would.
Crafty.
He's
clever.
crafty.
He's bold.
Yeah.
Yep.
And he gets some help along the way.
Oh, for sure.
Namely in a magic ring. But like even without that, like there's these moments where like
he still had to leave.
yeah,
still
or
had
like
to
there's
leave.
a scene in like the dark elf forest where he's always been good at throwing stones ever since he was little. He was like, I remember when I was little, I was always good at hitting a target. I always had a wicked arm. And he's just pegging the spiders. I don't even remember this. He's just pegging the spiders, taking them off one by one. And that's 8-year-old Bilbo Baggins was really good at that. And in order for him to discover 8-year-old Bilbo Baggins again, he had to get out of his world and into another. And so it's a story about what types of relationships we are able to build and cultivate if we choose to try to discover who we are and be brave enough to go into unknown environments. That's my first time I fell in love with story was The Hobbit. You?
Was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. I think Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory is the first time I ever heard a story and was like, holy shit, that's the coolest story ever. Charlie Buckets, no money, poor, nothing, a dream, a fucking 1 in a million dream.
Yeah.
And gets lucky and gets there. But then all the symbols in it of like temptation to drift away from your value with Slugworth, to lie and to try to get somewhere quicker, and how in doing so, drinking the fizzy lifting drinks, you almost die. Like you try to run when you should walk, and it ends up bad. And then that scene at the end with Willy Wonka when he says like, hey, what's up with the chocolate, the lifetime supply, and blah, blah, and he goes, you violated the contract, and he screams, that classic scene where he's just like, you stole fizzy lifting drinks, you blah, 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 right? He's like, no, they're gonna have to go up there and clean it, blah, 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 and he goes, you get nothing, sir. He's like, and then all of a sudden the guy was like, you're a swindler, a crook, and he's like, good day, sir, right? And I remember being like, damn. The first time you watch it, like, you're like, oh shit, dude, like you blew it.
Yeah.
And then Charlie like reaches into his pocket and he returns the gobstopper, not from a place of like, you're a jerk, like you're being mean and you're not giving me the chocolate, so take this back too. It's not like snippy. He gives it back like, I have not done the thing I should.
Yeah.
And then when he gives it back, he puts his hand on it. So shines a good deed in a weary world. Then he looks at him and he's like, it's yours, my boy. That's all I was looking for, was the right heart.
Yeah.
You didn't have to do it all right. Just had to have the right heart.
Yeah, to have integrity.
And that was such a moving thing for me to be like,
you're
not going to get it all right. You're just not.
Yeah.
But like the kingdom's that kind of thing, that award, that gift and the blessing of like what life has to offer is on the backside of having the right heart.
Yeah.
And seeking all the time, as best you know how, to do what is good and noble. And like,
not because it achieves the result, but because it's the right thing to do.
It's because it shines brightly when people do like good deeds.
Yeah.
And like, I remember being a kid and being like, I must have watched it 1,000 times. So good. Yeah. Anyways.
Boom.
The Barbarian, the unique thing about its class is it carries an arsenal, so it has 4 full weapon slots.
This conversation's a lot.
Yeah.
Keep on going.
We don't have to put this in the podcast. But they have like all these cool new ones now. There's like a druid that can shapeshift. That's like Huck's favorite because he'll be like a man and then he'll shapeshift into a werewolf.
Ranger.
Yes. They took away the ranger. So now
no ranger.
No, because now it's called a rogue.
Okay.
So it's like the assassin class, but it also has a bow.
Yeah.
And it has knives. And
yeah.
Like,
they got a magi.
Yeah, you call it a sorcerer.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, yeah.
Idiot.
Yeah, they're all different. Like sorcerer, warlock, mage, they all have different things.
Okay.
Right, and then a druid, right, is the same thing. It's still a magic class, but it uses elemental damage. Right, mage uses arcane damage or darkness. Right, you've read enough fantasy. You don't
I know. I do. I played it. Right, I'm just thinking about how like
and a sorcerer
ridiculous
can
this sounds for too adult.
No. It's because it was there in our childhood, dog.
Yeah.
It's like different if you were like never had done it. It sounds weird because it wasn't a part of your youth. We were the era that grew up with video games, dog. So we have those memories of like what it is to play that.
Yeah, and I
stuff.
still love it. And like if I pick up, I have Diablo 3 on the Switch, and I haven't played it a ton, but like if I pick it up, like it's just such an addicting game. So addictive. Like it's just you just feel like you're like everything is just whatever's next. Yeah. Okay, now I need the next armor. Okay,
we got this. Now we can up the level on the rift we can enter, which means blah blah. There's gonna be better drops.
Upgrade my Thunder Strike.